Fear, for a lonely person, is not the sudden scream-in-the-dark kind that arrives with sharp edges and leaves just as quickly, but a slow, patient presence that seeps into every corner of the day, stretching itself across mornings and evenings alike, settling into the quiet spaces where other people's voices should be, becoming a constant companion that feels both intimate and hostile at once. Because loneliness does not merely remove comfort but teaches fear how to speak in a familiar tone. How to wear the face of reason, how to sound like truth, and so the lonely person wakes with a subtle tension already curled inside their chest, a sense that something is wrong even when nothing has happened yet. A fear that the day will pass unnoticed, that their existence will not register in the world in any meaningful way, that they will move through hours like a ghost brushing against solid things without ever being felt, and this fear grows heavier in silence, because silence gives it room to echo, to repeat itself, to say you are forgotten, you are invisible, you are replaceable, and it becomes difficult to tell where fear ends and identity begins, as the lonely person starts to measure their worth by absence, by unanswered messages, by empty chairs, by the way time seems to slow down when there is no one to share it with. In this stretched-out time fear mutates into anticipation, the anxious waiting for connection that might never come, the dread of hoping too much and being disappointed again, because hope itself begins to feel dangerous, like leaning out over a ledge with no guarantee that someone will catch you if you fall, and so the lonely person learns to fear their own desire for closeness, to fear vulnerability, to fear the moment they admit, even to themselves, that they want to be known, because wanting creates stakes, and stakes invite loss, and loss has already taught them its lessons too well. There is a particular fear that comes at night, when distractions fade and the world grows quieter, when the lonely person lies in bed listening to the small sounds of their own body breathing, heart beating, thoughts circling, and realizes with a sharp clarity that if something were to happen to them in this moment, it might take a long time for anyone to notice. This thought is not dramatic but factual, which makes it more frightening, because it strips away the illusion that we are all constantly held in the awareness of others, and instead reveals a fragile independence that feels less like freedom and more like abandonment, and from this comes the fear of illness, of aging, of dying alone, not necessarily in a tragic sense but in a quiet, administrative one, where absence is recorded only as a missed appointment or an unanswered email, and this fear settles into the body, tightening muscles, quickening the pulse, making the lonely person hyper-aware of every ache and irregularity, as though their own body has become the only witness to its existence. Fear also lives in memory for the lonely person, because loneliness rarely appears without a history, and that history often contains moments of rejection, neglect, misunderstanding, or gradual drifting apart. These memories replay themselves not as distant events but as warnings, teaching the lonely person to expect abandonment even in new situations, to scan conversations for signs of boredom, to interpret delayed responses as lack of interest, to brace themselves emotionally before they are hurt again, and this creates a constant low-grade fear that sabotages connection before it can fully form, because the lonely person may withdraw, hesitate, or mask their true self in an effort to avoid rejection, only to later fear that it is this very self-protection that keeps them isolated, and so fear becomes a self-feeding loop, sustained by both action and inaction. There is also the fear of being fundamentally unlovable, a fear that does not announce itself loudly but whispers persistently, asking why, if the lonely person is kind or thoughtful or interesting, they are still alone, and these questions slowly transform into conclusions that feel inescapable. Once this fear takes root, it begins to color every interaction, turning compliments into exceptions, kindness into accidents, and indifference into proof, and the lonely person may smile outwardly while inwardly fearing that any affection they receive is temporary, conditional, or based on a misunderstanding that will eventually be corrected, leaving them alone again, and this fear makes joy feel fragile, as though happiness must be held carefully and quietly, lest it attract attention and be taken away. Fear for the lonely person is also tied to time, to the sense that life is moving forward without them, that milestones are being reached by others while they remain stuck in a waiting room of existence. And so they live in constant tension between wanting connection and fearing it, carrying on despite the weight of fear, hoping, sometimes quietly, sometimes desperately, that one day it will loosen its grip not because they have hardened themselves against the world, but because they are no longer alone.